Hello everyone. Today we're gonna talk about the ancient philosophies of Jainism, Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. This presentation is presented by Gofar, Sakina, Agha, and Farah, Muhammad, Intizar, Günel. Table of context first start with Jainism, Confucianism, Taoism, legalism. Jainism presented by me and Gofar, Confucianism by Günel Agha, Taoism by Farah Muhammad. Legalism by Intizar. Yeah. So first I will start with Jainism, the overall introduction, like overall view of it. Jainism is one of the world's oldest religions, originating in India at least 2,500 years ago. The spiritual goal of Jainism is to become liberated from the endless cycles of rebirth, which is reincarnation, and to achieve an all-knowing state called moksha. This can be attained by living a non-violent life or ahimsa with as little possible negative impact on other life forms, like no violence or violence at minimum, preferably none. The traditions of Jainism were largely carried forward by a succession of 24 Tirthankars, of teachers, most notably by Varhama Mahavira and the last of Tirthankars, and likely a contemporary of Gautama Buddha. Both Mahavira and Buddha emphasized the importance of self-discipline, meditation, and ascetic life as the key to salvation. Their teachings often stood in contrast to those of Vedic priests of the time who emphasized ritual practices and their own role as intermediaries between humanity and the gods. This is a very important part of the introduction. Today, a silver of India's population is 0.4%, identifies as Jain, making in the smallest of the country's six major religion groups after Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, and Buddhism. Indians overall know very little about this ancient religion and its practices, according to a June 2021 Pew Research Center report based on survey of nearby 30,000 Indians. And here are 6 facts about Jains in India and like the conclusion of the reports. First argument and fact is that Jains are concentrated in India's west, largely in Maharashtra. Despite Jainism's historic origins in India's eastern region, few Jains remain in the east. The changes in the regional concentration of Jains are believed to have started around 300 years before our century, when Jain began migration to west, possibly in search of more favorable kingdoms. Today 4% of population of Mumbai, the capital of Maharashtra and the commercial and business center of India, identifies as Jain. Second fact is that Jains are more highly educated and wealthier than Indian overall, and few identifies as lower caste. Roughly a third, 34% of Jain adults have at least a college degree compared to 9% of general public, according to India's 2021 census. Moreover, the vast majority of Jains fall into Indians' top wealth quantities, according to India's National Family and Health Survey. And the last but not least fact about the Jainism is almost all Jain are vegetarians, which I mentioned before, in the line guidance to proceed Chimsa. Like to not harm living beings and aliveness, they are keeping the standards of vegetarianism. Roughly 9 in 10 Indian Jains, 92% identifies as vegetarian, and two-thirds of Jains, 67%, go further by abstaining from root vegetables such as garlic and onion. Eating root vegetables is seen as form of violence in Jain teaching because consuming the root of a plant destroys the plant and its entirety. So these dietary practices extend outside the home. More than 8 in 10 Jain vegetarians also say they would not eat food in the home of a friend or neighbor who was non-vegetarian, 84%, or in a restaurant that served non-vegetarian food, which is 91%. So now my groupmate will continue the presentation.
Thank you, Sakina. I would like to continue by talking about the traditions and legends Jainism took part in. Throughout its long history, Jainism has seen periods when it has flourished and others when it has declined. But for thousands of years, it has remained a living religion and a way of life in India. It has exerted profound influence on many Indian civilizations, on cultures, and on the lives of millions of people. Through its teachings, through the conduct of its followers, and through its examples of its art and architecture. These concrete expressions of the Jain heritage are now counted among the greatest of the treasures which India has given to the world. Inevitably, given the immensely long history of Jainism, some changes have taken place over time. However, Jainism principles and teachings have remained remarkably constant, while allowing freedom and growth in its practices and rituals. The three most important expressions of the Jain teachings are the three jewels: right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct. For followers of the Jainis, the most important outward practices are nonviolence and reverence for all life, non attachment to worldly possessions, power or position, and relative pluralism, or in other words, multiplicity of views. Indian civilization has produced many philosophies and religions. However, one of the oldest religions of the world is Jainism. Jainism is not only a religion, but also a philosophy, a way of life taught and preached in the past by countless Jinas. As previously mentioned, although historians have made various speculations about its origin, the origin of Jainism remains untraceable. Jainis believed to be an eternal religion. The name Jainism comes from Jina, meaning victor, in the classical Indian language. Jinas are victors of the self, have achieved liberation from karmic bondage, and they have attained the true characteristics of the soul, such as infinite faith, infinite knowledge, perfect contact, infinite bliss, and eternality by their own efforts. Tirthankaras are persons who lead us towards the path of eternal life or perfection. Tirtha means spiritual path or the order which follows this pathway. Each Tirthankara establishes 4 orders of society consisting of monks, nuns, male lay followers, and female lay followers. Their Tirthankara leads the above 4 orders of society towards the path of spiritual perfection by teaching the truth and the universe in its nature, the meaning of life, and the ethical path to be pursued. When we say that Jainism is a religion preached by Jinas, we mean Jainism expresses the eternal truths of life and spirituality taught by pure souls who are victors of themselves and perfect knowledge and understanding of life. Jainism believes that the universe is eternal. It consists of such living and non-living things that may change form but are basically eternal. Time rotates in cycles like a wheel moving clockwise, descending and ascending in each half of the time cycle, descending and ascending for 24 Tirthankaras that establish the true happiness. It is important to understand that Jainis had their own legendary history. One of the important parts in their history involves 24 Tirthankaras, in other words, human beings who appear from time to time to start preaching and embodying the faith. The Jainis faith holds the belief that no one can achieve liberation. However, the main goal of the religion also contradicts this belief. This involves complete perfection and purification of a soul that can happen with the liberation of corporeal bodies. Liberation happens through the accumulation of karmas that get accumulated through the years, depending on your actions, and get bind to physical bodies through many births. I would now like to pass my word to Ginela Slanma.
Now I will talk about the Confucianism from 770 to 220 BCE. China enjoyed an era of great cultural development, and the philosophies that developed at this time were known as the 100 schools of thought. However, by the 6th century BC, the Zhou dynasty was in decline, and it was during this time that Confucius was born. He was from a noble family and worked as a government official until leaving service to become a teacher. Confucius were conservative and respected ritual and ancestor worship. In those times, a rigid social hierarchy existed in China, and ritual and ancestor worship were specially maintained by the Zhou dynasty, where the rulers received their authority from the gods through the heavenly mandate. Confucius searched for moral values that could enable rulers to govern justly by looking to the past for the answers. The main source we have for the teaching of Confucius is the Analects, or Records of Ritual, a collection of fragments of his writings and sayings compiled by his followers. It's primarily a political treatise, similar to a rule book for good government, but because he uses the word Jansi, which means gentleman, to symbolize a virtuous man, many passages of the Analects can also be considered a book of social etiquette. Confucius often refers to Tian, or heaven, as a source of moral order. Although this idea is consistent with the Chinese traditions, Confucius believed that virtue was something that could be cultivated by anyone instead of being reserved only for the ruling classes. He claimed that the virtuous man doesn't simply stand at the top of the social hierarchy, but understand his place within the hierarchy and embrace it. Furthermore, he believes that in order to achieve a just and a stable society, rulers had a duty to try to act with virtue and benevolence. Confucius referred to traditional Chinese values to describe how one should act to be virtuous: benevolence, righteousness, ritual propriety, wisdom, trustworthiness. Benevolence means interacting with others, guided by a sense of what's good from their perspectives, and can be described as caring for others and unselfishness. Example can include treating people on the street as important guests and common people as if they were attendants at a sacrifice. The second virtue, righteousness, is often described as situations involving public responsibility. Righteousness, according to Confucius, is what keeps a person uncorrupted, saying that a person should ignore the wealth and ranks they may attain by acting against righteousness, even if it means eating coarse rice, drinking water, and sleeping using one's bent arm as a pillow. Ritual propriety expresses a sensitivity to one's social place and willingness to play ritual roles, referring to the social norms underpinning different aspects of contemporary Chinese society. These included ceremonies such as marriages, funerals, and sacrifices, the etiquette of receiving guests, presenting gifts, and also the everyday gestures of politeness, such as bowing. The fourth virtue, wisdom, is related to knowing others, judging people and situations. Wisdom allows a gentleman to recognize dishonest and honest behaviors and distinguish between those telling the truth and lying. The virtue of trustworthiness qualifies a person to give advice to a ruler and a ruler, or to manage the people. According to Confucius, if one is trustworthy, others will give one responsibilities. When asked about good government, he explained that trustworthiness was superior to either food or weapons, concluding if the people don't find the ruler trustworthy, the state will not stand. The person who actually respects these values is called Jansi, the gentleman or superior man, a man of virtual learning and good manners. He believes that these principles should also be applied to personal relationships. Thank you for listening. Now I will continue.
Oh, hello everyone. Thank you, Gunel. Now it's my turn. So I would like to start with Confucianism philosophy. So Confucianism is often characterized as a system of social and ethical philosophy rather than religion, with no separately good or institution. Philosophy was very simple. Human beings were entirely good, meaning they were understood the difference between right and wrong, and were predisposed naturally to choose what is right. After Confucius' death, several of their disciples complete and credit on his work. The most famous were Mencius and Xinzi. Mencius traveled throughout China and praising Confucius' ideals and introduced to wider audience. Xinzi remained the system further and offered much more pragmatic vision of the philosophy, which was closer to legalism in some way. Confucianism was rejected by the Qing dynasty because it criticized their policy. Confucian practice were prohibited, and legalism was the state philosophy. During the Han Dynasty, Confucianism was made the official state ideology. Confucian schools were established, and Confucianism existed alongside Buddhism and Taoism as one of the most important Chinese religions. The imperial family supported the publication of morality book and encouraged to practice the human Confucian value, including respect for parents and loyalty of government. This side of the Confucianism was conservative and served a bolster established institution and long-standing social division. In the Song Dynasty, influence from the Buddhism and Taoism spurred the new confession wing was reformed, idealistic, and spiritual. Generated high ideal from family interaction, members were treat each other with love, respect, and consideration for the needs of all. It required officially criticize their rules and refer to serve the corrupt. The new Confucianism movement was starting. Sorry, the new Confucianism movement produced reform the philanthropists, dedicated teachers, and official and social philosophers. However, in the Qing dynasty, Confucian rival arose. Many scholars returned to the older ideas of Confucians. These different wings, Confucianism, conforming and reforming, competed with each other throughout Chinese history. Confucianism served both as a conservative state, orthodox, and motivated for reform. Confucianism was rejected by modern reform and by the Chinese community party because they thought it was outdated and did not match the communist idea. However, in our modern day, Confucian ideals are so closely intertwined with Chinese culture that the two cannot be separated. The philosophy Confucianism is still present directly with belief system or simply culturally, and continues to having a significant amount of supporter throughout the world. Thank you so much. I complete my speech.
Taoism, also known as Taoism, is a religion and a philosophy that originated in ancient China, that has influenced the culture and the folk of the Chinese nation. Taoism is said to be created by the philosopher Lao Tzu, who wrote the book Tao Te Ching around 500 BCE, the main book of Taoist philosophy. Taoists believe that humans and animals shall live in a balance with the Tao, otherwise known as the universe. They believe in spiritual immortality, where the spirit of the body never dies, but instead joins the Tao, universe. Tao Te Ching, also translated as the way and its power, is a combination of quotes and sayings from the late 3rd or early 4th centuries BCE. It gives Taoists food for thought and cause for actions as a life philosophy and a lifestyle. Despite the fact that many historians believe that there is not enough evidence that proves Lao Tzu ever existed, instead the book is a collection of different early ancient sayings of various authors and has been unified under the origin of philosopher Lao Tzu. This is believed to be done solely for political and cultural reasons. Lao Tzu is in fact appears to be as a prophet, as a messiah, even given the status of a god. The Tao is pretty complex to define simply, but many scholars believe it to be the way of the universe, or the universe itself. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Faraj, for this great introduction. Now let's take a look at Taoism in a detailed ways. The Tao or Tao is hard to define, but is sometimes understood as the way of the universe. Taoism teaches that all living creatures ought to live in a state of harmony with the universe and the energy found in it. Qi or Qi is the energy present and guiding everything in the universe. The Tao Te Ching and other Taoist books provide guides for behavior and spiritual ways of living in harmony with this energy. However, Taoists do not believe in this energy as a god. Rather, there are gods as part of the Taoist beliefs, often introduced from the various cultures found in the region known now as China. These gods are part of the Tao, like all living things, and Taoism has temples, monasteries, and priests who make offerings, meditate, and perform other rituals for their communities. One of the main ideas of Taoism is the belief in balancing forces or yin and yang. These ideas represent matching pairs such as light and dark, hot and cold, action and inaction, which work together toward a universal whole. Yin and yang show that everything in the universe is connected and that nothing makes sense by itself. Taoism became well known in the 8th century CE as a religion of the Tang dynasty. In the following centuries, it existed alongside Buddhism and Confucianism. However, during the communist takeover in 1959, Taoism, Confucianism, and other religions were banned. This caused a decline in the practice of Taoism in China. Many modern Taoists live in Taiwan, although recent reforms in China have increased the number of Chinese Taoists. Thank you for your attention. Now I give my floor to my groupmate.
Thank you, Pasha. Now I will continue the presentation with legalism, one of the four great philosophies of ancient China. Discussions of the human nature in ancient China refer to the innate nature of man and is defined as a starting point of life and is characterized as a transition between the heavenly path and the human path. Human nature is the basic diagnosis that determines how a person will live or how they should live. And all ancient Chinese philosophers' research on the subject mostly revolves around the origins of good and evil. While they question what is human nature is ostensibly a judgment about facts, it actually contains moral designs for how people should behave. The Confucian view of human nature is considered the most advanced because self-awareness and calculation of moral values are highly valued by Confucianists. But alongside Confucianism and Taoism, legalism also offers its own arguments about human nature. So Mencius, a Chinese Confucian philosopher, theory of man is good by nature, who often described as the second wise after Confucius himself, speaks of the innate rationality of human morality. Then Shunji, which is Confucian philosopher who came after Mencius, had knowledge, interest, talent, and the idea of nature realistically discusses the possibility of moral education. Therefore, Shunji's theory of original evil in human nature has historical relationship with legalism. Nonetheless, before Shunji, Shenyang of the state of Qin had already regarded the pursuit of interest and love of pleasure as human nature and planned his law reforms accordingly, making them the theoretical basis for his rewards and punishment system. Consequently, Han Fei, a student of Shunji, epitomized the thoughts of legalism. He inherits Shenyang and Shunji's opinions on human nature, saying, "Men's nature makes them dislike laboring and like resting, but resting leads to waste, which leads to non-governance, and which leads to finally social disorder." At the end, he concludes that it will absolutely not work if rewards and punishments are not implemented. And starting from the view that all dislike labor, seek benefits, and avoid disadvantages, Han Fei has evidently abandoned Shunji's idea of utilizing rules of property to change human thoughts. Instead, he changed it to simply respecting lower people and relying on laws. He thought relations between ruler and minister, father and son, are built on the basis of interest, treating one another with shames. It is important to govern the kingdom based on the people's situations, which means using proper rewards and benefits to persuade and use cruel torture and severe punishments to prohibit based on the fact that all men dislike labor and like rest, seek benefits, and avoid disadvantages. And rulers should treat the people with tolerant laws, but not with benevolent sympathy. So the forerunner of the legalist school can be traced back to Guangdong in the spring and autumn period, but its actual founder is Li, presided over the political reform in the Wei in the early Warring States period. Li Kui emphasizes the combination of agriculture, advocates varieties of operations on farming, making the state rich and its military force efficient, and wrote the first systematic code of laws in ancient China. After Li Kui, the representatives of legalist school are Shen Yang, Shen Boi, and Shen Dao, but the comprehensive synthesis of legalism is Han Fei from the late Warring States period. And Han Fei says, during ancient times, people competed with others by morality, during the Middle Ages with wisdom and strategy, and now in modern times with their powers. Furthermore, legalism admires power but deprecates morality, and this is in direct opposition to the value orientation of Confucianism. Legalism admiration for power means that emperors should concentrate the strength of their people on agriculture so as to gain the purpose of making the state rich and its military force efficient and ruling the whole world. If the ruler wanted to engage the people in strenuous agricultural production and the danger of war, he cannot move them through moral lectures, but with rule of law. The founder of this philosophy throughout the history of the philosophy of legalism, Shanyang values laws, means fa, Shenboi promotes administrative strategy, shu, and the Shandao affirmed power, shi, and Han Fei combines all three. And he also says power is the basic material that can rule over all people. And the theories of legalism, on the other hand, were practiced by several generations of rulers in the state of Qin, which eventually annexed the other 6 states and unified China. However, the Qin dynasty was short-lived, exposing the flaws of relying solely upon criminal laws. After the Han dynasty, Confucians supported a system that ruled predominantly with virtue criminal laws in an assisting position. And later rulers adopted a ruling method that combines Confucian benevolence and legalist rigor, appearing as Confucian rulers, but utilizing legalist methods on the side. So to conclude, Confucianism, Taoism always sought to finding an ideal model of society in history, while the school of legalism contained realists who advocate establishing laws in accordance with what was opportune and regulating rights to meet practical requirements. And nevertheless, legalism puts forward clearly a theory of historical evolution as the arguments for changing the law, enforcing the law, and competing in force. So thank you for listening and your attention. And here are the references. Thank you.